Greetings, welcome to the SciFi Pubcast, the podcast that tries to be a pub, and perhaps someday a pub that tries to be a podcast. And as always, we are looking for customers to visit our bar. So if you're passionate about something, you want to be on a podcast, please let us know. Because this bar is all about community. We're not doing this for money, we don't have Patreon, and we don't sell advertising. If you want to help us, please consider leaving a 5-star review wherever you find the show, and joining our Discord server. And subscribe to our SciFi Pubcast on YouTube, because we have a YouTube channel now. I'm Joel, and I'm the owner of the SciFi Pubcast, so to speak. And I'm looking around, and yes, we have a full crew on today. We have Kerry Simpson, Dirk Beebe, and Dr. Randal Graham joining us by audio. So Kerry and Dirk's on the video. Kerry, how are you doing?
I'm good. I just got home from a nice weapons class in the park. Since they semi-lifted some of the restrictions and opened up the parks over here in LA, we've been doing weapons classes outside for the last week.
So when you say
weapons,
what type of weapons are we talking about?
Staff and wooden sword.
Cool.
Staff and boken.
Yeah.
So,
just have to say that, ask that because you're from the United States of America, of course. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, I assumed it was AR-15s.
No. Those would still not be allowed in the park. And we actually had someone suggest that they do the sword drawing class in the park, and my teacher was like, no, we don't want people. Wooden swords is one thing, but actual real swords is something completely different. We do not need to be doing that in the park.
Oh, wow.
And apparently I just had a biker gang go by my apartment. Sorry about that.
Hey, it's California. It's expected, actually, so, yeah.
Especially in the apocalypse.
Yeah. So, Dirk, I understand it's your birthday today on our recording date. Happy birthday, man.
Yes, it is.
Hooray!
Yay! And how you doing, Dirk?
I'm doing as well as I can be. This was the day I was supposed to be getting to Disney World to experience Galaxy's Edge for the first time in my life, but man plans and dog laughs, as they say.
Yeah, I can relate. I really don't think my trip to Disneyland in Anaheim is going to happen in August in Star Wars Celebration, but we'll see. Yeah.
It's a long way away, and Orange County is a little more right wing than Los Angeles County is.
Okay.
So depending on whether or not they believe the local governments, who knows?
Yeah, I still have to fly through LA, and that's problematic. So. All right.
That is true.
Yeah. And of course, we have Randal Graham, of course, law professor and author of Before Life. Drink.
I will drink. Afternoon, everybody.
Randal, it's been like a month since we talked to you last. How are you doing?
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate the chance to hang out with you guys. Things are going pretty well for me. My life in lockdown looks a hell of a lot like my life not in lockdown. I wake up in the morning, I write, I go down and work out in the gym for a bit, I come up, I write some more, rinse and repeat. And so, yeah, it's not had a huge impact on my life. It occupies a lot of my thoughts because my wife works in a hospital. And so her life has taken some drastic changes. But in terms of the actual movements I make during the day, you'd be hard-pressed to tell when I'm in 2020 and when I'm in 2019. I mean, it's exactly the same.
And I've seen your Scotch collection, so you forgot that on your list of things to do every day.
Yeah, well, not quite every day, but some days. Yesterday, I'm going to make Joel jealous. We had Johnny Walker Blue, which I had never tried until I bought a bottle of it for my father-in-law's birthday. His birthday was about 10 days ago. And so we had a little party in my backyard. We're allowed to have a socially distanced party just for the three of us, myself, my wife, and my father-in-law, staying 2 meters apart the whole time and having lots of hand sanitizer out there and being super careful. But that was the first time I've really gotten a chance to hobnob with anybody who wasn't my wife during the course of this pandemic. So it was lovely to see him, drink some Johnny Walker, eat some chocolate cake. So everything's looking up on my end of the universe.
Nice.
How about you, Joel? How are you doing?
Well, I've been stuck in my apartment for over 2 months now. It's been 9 weeks since I've been to a real bar. I live by myself, so I'm talking a lot to my bar collection, liquor bottles. I don't know. I'm doing okay.
Do they talk back?
Not yet, but there you
Okay.
go. I've got into the whole tiki scene, at least researching for my bar. So I'm researching how to do tiki-type cocktails. And
Mai Tais and such?
yeah, Mai Tais, Blue Hawaiians, things like that, right? Even something like Loosey Goosey, like Singapore Slings. With
very nice.
Tiki's great because it is very much an American, Californian creation. Where they basically steal from all over the place, and it has become a huge American thing back in like the 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s, and then the 60s hit, and then it went through a big decline. And then about 10 years ago, it's just people are into it now. So it's becoming, or is now, this hip scene all over the place in Hawaii, in Florida, in California. Yeah.
I will have to send you the photographic evidence one day of one of the funnest nights I have had in recent memory. And that was a few years back, my wife and I at the Tonga Room in San Francisco, trying all of their cocktails and trying to pose in ways that suggested what the cocktail was. So I was holding up Mai Tai beside a Mai Tai and trying to look like a zombie while we drank a zombie. And I remember most of that night. And what I do remember of it was fun.
No hurricanes, I take it. So, yeah.
No, and various dishes made with Spam and pineapple and all kinds of like pseudo Hawaiian stuff. It was super fun.
Well, I'm experimenting with different bitters right now, and I'm considering making my own syrup. So that's where my headspace has been. Okay.
Oh, very nice.
I figure I need to find my tiki zen to maintain my own level of healthy sanity. So, healthy mental health. So, that's good. Yeah, that's about it. What else? Quick recommendation. Do you guys have Apple TV by chance? Anyone?
I do.
I do.
You should check out Mythic Quest. It's a little comedy show that's about the video game industry, and it's pretty funny. But why I'm bringing this up is because a couple of days ago, they released a special episode where they're all in quarantine, and they actually shot it while they're all in quarantine on iPhones. And it's a really good episode. That's only one season so far. There are, I think, maybe 8 episodes, but it's really funny. And it's on point for the whole geek science fiction video game aspect of this show.
I resemble that description.
So, yeah. So there's that. And talking about recommendations, our beer recommendation for this episode, and at this point, because I haven't been to any bars recently, I've been going online and trying to find beers with cool graphics, is Lodestar Sour Ale with Pink Kiva by the Elawar Brewing Company, which is just north of Guelph, Ontario, Canada. And if you look at the image, there is a pink giant sea monster, or like a giant octopus. And there's a thing about this show and giant sea creatures, so definitely recommend that. So moving on, because, well, you can order it online, by the way, if you want to get a Lodestar. Today, what are we doing again? Oh, right, this Frakking Battlestar Galactica. We're finally doing it. Yes, we're looking for the 13th tribe and talking all things Battlestar Galactica. As I said, all this has happened before and will happen again. Yeah.
Or to borrow from the last Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy novel, everything that happens, and everything that happens again, or something like that.
Yeah, no.
And I that will not be the first time I blaspheme when we talk about this, because I recently finished watching the reboot, and I suddenly realized that I either suffer from or completely enjoy reading too much Douglas Adams.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, totally.
Nothing wrong with that. No.
I totally get the absurdity of Douglas Adams, and I think we live in an absurd time, so it's only fitting.
Well, when I realized that the colonists were basically the Golgafrinchans, I'm just like, oh shit.
Oh, dear Lord.
This is wrong. This is so wrong.
That's a good parallel.
Oh, God.
What?
That's a good parallel. I like it.
I mean, come on. I mean, it's right there. Except that they didn't just let Arc B go. They got the entire colony there.
We should probably mention we're going to be spoiling the entire series in this discussion. So if you haven't watched the show, beware.
And for the record, I don't suspect Dirk as being a Cylon sleeper agent. But then again, he does work in our kitchen, so who knows? Really.
Yeah,
I don't know. A couple of the Cylon sleeper agents were not that great. So
Yeah, I think we're allowed to spoil this one. It's been over 11 years now, and I think we're safe. But yes, to any patrons who haven't watched it, go watch it.
And then come back and listen to this.
This podcast is very good, but the series is better, I think, so far. So go watch the series and then come back and listen to the podcast.
Yeah.
It's close.
It is. It's interesting because I remember the original as a kid. I was really young. So a lot of the imagery is still with me as memories. But when the new, what's the term they use? Reimagine miniseries came out, which became the series, right? I saw the first episode too. I thought it was just horribly bad. And then I just never got into it because it was a really busy point in my life. I won't get into what I was doing, but I was doing a lot of really dangerous and busy type work following 9/11. So, yeah.
Well,
then,
that was one of the reasons I never got into the reboot.
Yeah, and then I got access to it maybe a couple years ago, so I watched it and thought it was really good. And I can see how people fell in love with this series. It's like catching. Go ahead, Randall.
I was going to say it's really interesting to me that you watched the first couple episodes and weren't pulled in, because the first episode, 33 of the series, to me is almost perfect TV.
Oh, interesting. Why?
The tension created by the attack every 33 minutes, and the not understanding why it's happening and not even really knowing what's going on, but every 33 minutes, the survivor count, which started at just too short of 50,000 people, just starts ticking down every single attack. And when you realize other things about the scarcity of resources in the show, like we're not talking about phasers that you can have go on forever as long as they're recharged. It's bullets. And every time you fire a bullet, that's fewer bullets. And you don't exactly have a large-scale industrial complex able to resupply everything. So all that stuff really came to bear for me in episode 133. And I paused to raise a glass to the brilliance of Ronald Moore, who I got to love in Star Trek The Next Generation. Yeah, everybody have your toast. I got to love him in The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, and to a much lesser extent in Voyager. He wasn't that heavily involved in Voyager, but I didn't really realize his involvement in Star Trek and what a big impression he'd made on that until I got into Battlestar Galactica and started looking into who made it. And I'm like, oh, this guy's a genius. Like, he's so good. And between him and Bear McCreary, the guy who did the music for Battlestar Galactica, I think you've got two people who just happen to be firing on all thrusters and were at the peak of their powers, or at least a peak in their powers for this show. I loved it.
Plus, you've got to admire a production company that centers their big activation sequence around all along the Watchtower.
That was very cool.
I love that.
This is like a universal song, and the fact that they ended the series with my favorite cover of that, which is the Hendrix one. Although Randall, you're gonna come up on my second favorite cover of that shortly when you get. I forget where it is in Lucifer, but yeah. Tom Ellis just did my second favorite version of All Along the Watchtower.
Yeah, we were talking.
I actually didn't know that song at all, so when they used it at the end of season 3, it meant nothing to me.
We were talking about Lucifer, the series, before we started to record, and Randall has finally checking out Lucifer. And you know who else is in the series that was in this series? Any guesses?
Shelfer?
I have learned.
Yeah, absolutely. And she's amazing. There you go. I should have
And
stayed
she's
watching.
Canadian.
Yes, I know.
Number of excellent Canadians in this series.
Yes.
So, yay for...
and they filmed that in the lower mainland of BC, so Vancouver. Yeah. There you go. I just think when I first saw the series, I was busy. I thought I didn't remember the original series, and I should have, because it's basically everything went for a crap in the original series in the first episode as well for the humanity. I just thought I hate traitors. I hate incompetent traitors. So the whole Gaius Baltar, played by James Callis, his character really annoyed me when I first saw it.
Well, I thought what they did with Baltar for this series was fascinating. Because, and no disrespect to John Colicos whatsoever, he was fabulous as Baltar in the original series, but not making him not just the mustache twirling villain, making him just a coward who is going to find a way to survive no matter what he has to do, and then making him not really even the villain in the end. And that was just like, wow. Like,
but did it strain your suspension of disbelief, though, to have an incompetent narcissist become president?
If not for the last 3 years, no. But no, I also watched the original when I was a kid. It would run, like they would run it, and then they would run on Saturday mornings, and then they would run Buck Rogers, and then they would alternate between the two, and then Sci-Fi Channel would do the same thing in the mornings for a long time. And I admit that was one of the reasons I didn't get into the reboot originally. Is like I saw the first half of the miniseries, and then like, okay, this looks cool. I appreciate that they didn't redesign any of the ships. I appreciate that they used the theme song on occasion. I actually do. I love that they use the original theme song for like important parts of the story as like an anthem. And it's like, okay, this is cool. This is good. But then I think life got busy and stuff, and I just dropped off. It kind of fell off my radar.
Yeah, I usually am all about hardcore science fiction and military fiction movies, series, and in my sci-fi. So I should have loved it, and I do love it. But it took me a while for me to come back to it.
Well, okay, so when they first started making rumblings about doing this reboot, my best friend and I thought that they were just going to try to do like a Next Generation type story. Because at the time, I think there were only 3 of the surviving characters whose actors had passed away.
Okay.
It's like we were just missing Lorne Greene, Fred Astaire, and I think John Colicos had passed away by then. I can't remember.
Did you say Fred Astaire?
Yes, Fred Astaire was in. Fred Astaire guest starred on an episode of the original Battlestar. He played a character who may or may not have been Starbuck's father. They never really answered the question. So those were the only people we had lost at that point. And I checked a few weeks ago, and we still have most of the main cast of the original show alive, except we've lost Richard Hatch and a few others. But most of them are, Dirk Benedict's still alive, Noah Hathaway's still alive. All the female pilots were still alive. Like, they could totally work them in somehow if they really wanted to.
I loved how they brought back Richard Hatch when they did bring him back.
I did too. I love the way they brought him back. I think one of my issues with with how they brought back the series, though, is that I get it now, and this is nothing sexist or anything, but I really didn't understand why they felt they needed to make Starbuck and Boomer women.
Right.
When they had Athena, Adama's daughter, and they eventually got Shiva, who was Kane's daughter, on the show, and they were both pilots in their own right, and they were both pretty badass. Well, Shiva was a little more badass than Athena. Athena didn't really pilot that much, but they could both fly. And it's like, okay, so why do we need to swap genders on these two characters and then write out the female characters that we had already?
That's interesting. I think the whole gender thing's quite interesting in the reimagined version of this, reimage version of this. And I think the gender thing actually worked in hindsight. It really worked well.
Oh yeah, it worked well. It worked well. What they did with Katie Sackhoff is fabulous, and what they did with Boomer was fascinating. I just found it interesting that they took. I also found it interesting that they took the two black men in the original series and made one a white guy and the other one an Asian woman. Like, okay.
I think they missed an opportunity with Starbuck. I was so hoping they'd have a theme where she was completely unable to spell anybody's name.
Well, that was the other thing that was my thinking, probably possibly incorrectly, but the one of the theories was that they were really only making either Starbuck or Apollo a female so that they could eventually ship the two of them. Like, well, if that's one of your reasonings, you didn't have to do that. You didn't have to make one of them female. I mean, fanfic writers have been shipping Starbuck and Apollo for ages.
Listen, I'm just happy they didn't have a really annoying young kid on board, like the original, like Boxy.
But that was the thing. They wrote Boxy back into the show. He disappeared after 2 episodes, but they wrote Boxy back into the show. But they couldn't write in Athena or Shiva.
Yeah, I don't remember which. That was season 1. They brought Boxy back.
It's like the second and third episode. Like he was one of the kids that they got off Caprica when Hilo stayed behind.
Yeah, all I need is another young annoying kid on my science fiction TV shows. Wrestling Crusher.
Nice.
God. Okay.
Shame on you.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Well, we're talking about things that annoyed us on sci-fi shows, Battlestar Galactica in particular. Now, I feel sad because I'm about to say a lack of appreciation for the talents of a Canadian actor, and that's Michael Hogan, who played Saltai.
Oh, yeah.
I liked the character. I liked the part that he played, but the way the performance was delivered, I just found so over the top.
Oh, yeah.
That it irked me from time to time. And that would sometimes break my suspension of disbelief watching the show. Like, it would take me out of the show and start thinking about Michael Hogan's a very good actor. And so I was really interested in, like, why is he making the choice to play the character that way? Is it the director? What's going on? So I ended up thinking about production instead of the show. And the other thing that did that for me is Dr. Baltar. To me, looks so much like Dr. Bashir.
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
They're like very similar, not in character, but they look kind of the same. They have similar names, and again, that would always make me think of interesting casting choice, but especially with Ronald Moore being on both shows. Yeah. So those were the two things that sucked me out of the show. But yeah, Saltai drove me bonkers.
It was almost like they were his character was overcompensating. It's like when they finally realized that when they finally outed him as a Cylon, it's like, oh, he's been overcompensating this entire time.
Well, he reminded me of Relic on the Beachcombers the whole time, which was just one of the craziest Canadian TV characters ever. There's no way the Americans listening know anything about that show. But it was just like way over the top alcoholic goofball. It wasn't my cup of tea. I'm sure there are people who think it was one of the best acted roles ever, but it didn't match up with my particular sensibilities.
I thought Ty was great on the show. I thought the acting was always top notch from every single person from the top down.
Yeah, I can believe.
I'm surprised to hear someone not loving Ty's performance, because I thought he was good.
Really? Oh, I thought it was bonkers.
See,
to me, that was just the...
Yeah, occasionally got a bit over the top, like a bit much. Like, no, seriously? Okay. Never mind.
One guy who did a fantastic job, Jamie Bamber. I did not know him before this show, so I watched it and had no idea that he has the cutest little British accent in the world. And he completely suppressed that. Which I found I quite liked his character. I liked a lot of the supporting cast too. People who didn't stick around for the whole run, like Felix Gaeta. I just loved his character. I loved the willingness of the show to kill off characters like Gaeta and Duwala, like innocent good people. Well, no one was innocent, but people who were just generally good people who you wanted to see succeed.
Innocent.
Yeah, and then you see them get ganked. It made the show feel high stakes the whole time through.
Yeah.
I actually liked the Michael Hogan performance in Colonel Sultai because he reminds me of... I can see the military aspect of it because I actually met people like that in my dealings with, especially reserve regiments before 9/11. The whole drunken reservist types. So these characters do exist. They're pit bulls. They're just dogs, and that's their character, right? They're just very aggressive, and then they hit the booze, and then the organization doesn't want to deal with them. So
interesting.
Yeah. Right.
And we had a few...
I thought Baltar was a particularly great performance because he always looked like completely overwhelmed and insane, and like he has no idea what's going on, and he's just like desperately trying to catch up.
Yeah, he always looked like he was in over his head. But he's also the smartest guy in the room, so it's just like, okay.
Yeah, I loved the notion that intelligence doesn't necessarily translate into generalized competence. He's this really bright guy, but he's always a trapped rat as a result of his choices and his a touch of narcissism and self-interest. I thought he was really, really well done. I liked him a great deal. I also quite like Rekha Sharma as Tori Foster, who, as you know, she makes an appearance in Star Trek Discovery as Lieutenant Landry. Big fan. Other Star Trek crossovers, Michelle Forbes, who was the Admiral, who had been Ensign Rowe.
Yeah, and I thought that casting was genius, especially, considering that Admiral Kane in the original series was Lloyd Bridges.
I did not remember that. That's cool.
Yeah. And yeah, like that's like I said, Shiva on the original series was his daughter, and I like that they kept the Pegasus around longer than the 2 episodes we got in the original series. It's like, okay, this makes more sense.
That's cool.
Yeah, and we were talking about crossovers. Xena Warrior Princess, Lucy Lawless, outstanding,
she was great.
Outstanding.
Also Dean Stockwell.
Oh yeah. Quantum Leap. Yeah.
I loved having him there. That was fantastic.
Yes.
I don't recalling this at this moment, but I'm just looking through the cast online and I see Nana Visitor. Major Kira appeared as Emily Kowalski in Battlestar Galactica.
Yeah.
She was in the reboot?
Yeah.
Yes.
It must have been a brief.
She
brief
was
role.
She was someone who was in the infirmary dying of cancer.
That's a shame.
Oh, that must have been one of the episodes I skipped when I rewatched it 6 months ago.
Wow.
But yeah, she's good. I like the show a lot. I like the dark sensibility. Every once in a while, everyone has their tipping points, and once in a while it would cross a tipping point for me. The sexual slavery of the one version of Number 6, Trisha Helfer's character, being held on the other ship, that really kicked me in the teeth. That episode, I found that really, really hard to deal with. I mean, it's a thing to talk about when you start regarding people as objects. And arguably, Cylons started out as objects, right? The whole notion that when you start treating people as things, that's the root of all horrible behavior. And that was an important theme to explore. And they were treating Cylons as things. And there were origin-related reasons that you could sort of philosophically explain that, but it became really interesting. Like now that they have sentience and you're still treating them as things, look at how horrible this can get. So glad they explored the theme, but oh boy, did that give me dark imagery that I didn't need to have in my head for a few days. But it was well done on the part of everyone who did it. But same thing with the death of Duala. That really clobbered me. And like there she is, just being a nice person, married to Lee, and realizing that Lee's never, ever actually going to be in love with her. And we see the choices that she ended up making. Super dark, really well acted.
But what was that? See, they never really talk about that. But was that just, her marriage falling apart, or was that, that happened like right after they found Earth, the first?
Oh yeah.
Earth.
Yeah, I as I recall, and I just watched that a few months ago, that was just her giving in to despair because they found their quest was pointless in the end. They found Earth and it was an irradiated wasteland, and now they had nowhere to go.
Well, to me, yeah, it's never just one thing, and it was just everything in her life, like starting with the destruction of billions of humans, leaving only 50,000 kicking around. Like it's like anything bad that happens now in the real world is bad, and also it's in the pandemic.
Right.
And in Battlestar Galactica, your marriage falls apart and there are only 50,000 people alive. And then you find out that the planet that you thought was going to be your sanctuary is crap. It was the despair in that character and portrayed by that character, I just thought was brilliantly done and sad, and it knocked the crap out of me for a couple of weeks.
I found the misdirection of them fighting Earth fascinating. It was so they find Earth, and there's this shot of all the ships, ascending towards Earth, and I was waiting for the nuclear missiles to come up from the planet because I mean, I didn't see much of Battlestar 1980, or Galactica 1980, but they did get to Earth, and it was, Earth of the 80s. So it's like that was how I was thinking. It's like, okay, they're gonna get to Earth, and they're going to find the civilization there, and the civilization is going to attack them because there are all these ships coming for the planet.
See, that's interesting. That discovery that Earth was irradiated in a wasteland and not useful was when the series surprised me briefly, because I started watching the series. I was watching it for the first time with a friend who was watching it at the same time as me. We weren't together, but he was watching it in Toronto. I was watching it in London. And we would confer every few episodes. And after about 4 or 5 episodes, I said, this is totally going to turn out that this is in the long distant past, and they are going to be the progenitors of the human race, right? Like that's what's going to happen. This is set way in the past. And he's like, no, it's not. And so I thought I had called the ending from day one. and I had.
You had. But he also called the ending.
But when we got to Earth and it was destroyed and irradiated, I thought, oh my God, they fooled me the whole time. So I stopped believing in what I had thought I had called early on. And but it turned out that is the way it ended. And my reasons for thinking that had been about the evolution of their religion. The way their polytheistic religion was moving toward this monotheistic religion of the Cylons, and the idea of monotheism seemed completely foreign to them. I thought, well, they're definitely not in the future, and it just seemed like it was set up to create a civilization from the distant past that would give rise to our own. Wow. I'm kind of glad it turned out that way, but I was glad they gave me that hiccup of, wait a minute, I was wrong the whole time, which let me enjoy the show a little bit more.
Well, I don't know the mythology really, but I have been told from several of my Mormon friends who that a lot of the story of Battlestar Galactica is based heavily in Mormon mythology.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
So,
interesting.
And that's about the extent of my knowledge of it. I don't actually know the mythology. All I know is what I've been told by several friends, including my best friend who have been in the Mormon faith.
Yes, if you look at the original series, it was created by a fellow by the name of Glenn A. Larson, and he was a member of Latter-day Saints. And so a lot of the mythology, yes, it goes back to that particular current religion, which is very forward-looking in its outlook. So you have the tribes, you have the Book of Abram, you have all this stuff going on, and it's a thinly veiled interpretation of it. Now that's the original. The re-image one took more liberties with that and it got less Mormon-like, but it still incorporated a lot of aspects from the original series.
They definitely drink way more coffee and alcohol than most Mormons I know.
Yeah, but it's you have to remove the adherence to that particular faith to the story itself, right? Because it's a fascinating story. It's the Exodus. It's very much like the the leaving of the Jews from Egypt, trying to find Jerusalem, right? So it's like yes, so many things going on, and they tweak it, so it's not exactly a carbon copy of it, but it's still intriguing because it. But
there's enough there. The bones are still there.
And when you put on stuff like ways of thinking about things from the Greek gods and the Roman gods. And it's just a mishmash of stuff. And you add these horrible circumstances where they're lost, and they have these Cylon robots who are trying to kill them and totally annihilate them and make them extinct. Yeah, very dark.
But then it turns out that the people on the first version of Earth that they found were all Cylons. So just like, oh, well, shit. Everything we've been taught is wrong. Maybe.
Yeah, because what's the ding happening? Is that?
Sorry, my phone just went off. Sorry about that.
No worries. I thought as long as it's not the Cylons and there's not some sort of thing that's going to happen in 33 minutes, I'll be fine.
That's right. Yeah.
It's interesting trying to make sense of the ways of thinking about bigger issues that this TV series presented. Like the big picture stuff. Sure, we can talk about torture, how it mirrors a lot of what was happening in places like Iraq with the American occupation at Abu Ghraib, right? When you're doing things for what you think is the right reasons, but then you have an element where are just completely jettisoning human rights and treating everyone like things, which is dehumanizing, which leads to genocide, of course, if you go down that path far enough. But you look at it, the idea of searching for something good, like there's aspects of angels, there's aspects of, God. And I rewatched the last 3 episodes before this podcast, and they got into it slightly because they're trying to provide answers to these big, giant questions, and there's no definitive answers.
I actually love that the treatment of Starbuck for that very reason, because you can go on the internet and go down a million holes about what Starbuck was and what the returned Starbuck was and what actually happened there. Was she resurrected? Was she an angel? Like, what was she from day one? What was she at the end? And I love that there's no explanation in the show. There's no canonical, well, here's what happened. She, went through a Tetryon field. This, like they tend to do in my own shows that I like, Star Trek, where they try to explain everything through some sort of semi-acceptable technobabble. Here, they're just like, wow, sometimes crazy stuff happens and you don't understand why.
Yeah, like people come back from the dead all the time, mostly Cylons.
Yeah, that's right.
Gee, what other religion do we have that happened in?
My interpretation of the Starbuck thing was that she was treated the same way that Baltarn 6 was. You could argue that in the miniseries, when Baltarn 6 are in his house and the nuclear wave hits them, that they actually did die there, and that God kept them alive. But then copies of themselves are made into the angels that became Head 6 in Baltar's head, and head Baltar in Caprica 6's head. And so they were copies of the original souls, but acting according to God's wishes, and they knew what God's commandments were. Like they didn't know everything, but they knew who they were serving. Whereas the Starbuck, she was a human person who had the visions of the mandala, and then she did die for real in that wormhole or whatever it was. So her body physically died, and they found her original physical body on the Earth, but once again, God, he didn't save the original Starbuck, but he made a copy of her as an angel. Only this one didn't know about God, so she knew she had this calling and directive, but she didn't know where it was from or what its origin was. So once she got them to Earth, she then knew that she was done, and she just physically disappeared as Apollo turned his back, because she was, she was she was like a hard light hologram, let's say. And once she had served God's purposes, he switched her off. That's my interpretation.
You mean that there was like a plan involved?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, by the way, I gotta mention. So the reason I did a rewatch 6 months ago is because, oh God, what are their names? I want to say, oh God, I forget their names. Something Altman and something Gross, but they did an oral history of Battlestar Galactica called So Say We All. They've done a bunch of these books over the last few years. They did brilliant ones for Star Trek, which I'm actually reading right now. They did one for Buffy and Angel. They did one for James Bond that just came out, and they did one for Galactica. So it's called So Say We All. It's a really interesting read. It's basically a lot of oral interviews with all the people involved, stitched together into a narrative. It's a really fun read. It had a lot of, and they give you the nitty gritty on the behind the scenes. They tell you who hated who and who had a scandal and who got fired. There wasn't a lot of that on Galactica. They were generally one big happy family, but it was a very interesting story. And they really get into the behind the scenes of the creative decisions, because that's what I want to know about the most. I don't want to know about, what the actors thought of something. I want to know about the writers and how they created the story and how they changed the story and what happened season to season. And they really get into it on that. And yeah, they had no idea where they were going with the show. They kind of had a loose idea of season to season, but they did not know what the Cylon plan was until like halfway through the show. And they only decided about the final 5 Cylons as they were closing out the 3rd season. So they really were making this stuff up on the fly. And the whole thing with Starbuck and the mandala, that was made up on the fly too. They just had her do that painting all the way back, and I want to say early season 2, and they didn't know what it was. They're just doing a character bit. And then when it came time to the little death scene, that's when they decided to retroactively write that back in.
Yeah, they need a better plan, or a plan.
Did you guys enjoy the movie at the end of it, Battlestar Galactica, The Plan, where they tried to explain what the plan had been?
I did.
I haven't
yeah.
seen. I haven't seen that one yet.
I thought it was okay. To me, it revealed more than ever that they really, when they were writing the show, they didn't know what the plan was.
Yeah, definitely.
And so
I find ironic, because every episode through like season 2 is the Cylons were created by man. They rebelled and they have a plan. Okay, so what's the plan?
Kill all humans.
Apparently,
we'll
that's
figure
as
it out
far
as
as
we
their
go.
apparently that's as far as their plan goes.
Yeah, we'll figure it out as we go along.
Oh yeah, never
It's
mind.
a really thought out plan.
Now, are we allowed to speak of the dreadfully boring watching paint dry that is Caprica?
Oh God!
I have not seen it yet.
I made
only
it. I
saw
made.
some of it.
Yeah, I made 3 episodes in before I bailed.
I bought the season pass. I have watched every episode of Caprica, and I wanted to love it. It has such good actors in it. It has some really good performances, but oh my word, that was a slow program.
Well,
Oh,
the
dear.
problem is it's before a war happens, so nothing can ever actually happen, plot or action wise. Do they even have the action scenes or fights or bad guys or?
It's mostly contemplating one's navel.
What I generally enjoy, but still.
But yeah, I really wanted that to be amazing. It's like when Babylon 5 ended and they were coming up with possible spin-offs, and I was so excited, and then just nothing.
Well, Crusade was good, but they, until the studios got in there and said, "Oh, we need more gunfights and shit," and the creator and JMS was like, "No."
Yeah,
Galen from Crusade is actually my all-time favorite B5 character.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But,
I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, but if you like B5 and Crusade, you have to read the Technomage trilogy novels. It's Galen's entire backstory, and it's the whole history of the Technomages. It is legitimately well written. It is a really good story. It's not just like, oh, it's a tie-in novel and you learn some stuff. It is a really good story. Highly recommended.
Very cool.
Nice.
But anyway, back to BSG.
Yeah, one person we haven't talked about at all. We haven't talked much about Adama, but before that, President Roslin. I love the idea of her character so much because I work in sort of a collegial atmosphere where everyone looks upon each other as equals, and occasionally one of us has to rise to be dean and head the place. And the idea of being in charge of anything, to me, is just the worst thought in the world. I would hate to run anything. First off, I would be terrible at it. Second of all, just not interesting in any way, but just not in my skill set in any way. And so here's a person who's really good at being the Secretary of Education.
Yeah.
And she's that's right. And she's very good at what she does, but she has no particular ambition, doesn't want to lead. No evidence that it's in her skill set at all, and like, boom, you're in charge of all the people. I thought that was a really interesting one, and also, by the way, you're dying. I thought that was an incredible
and having
introduction to that
visions.
character. Yeah, I really, really quite enjoyed her portrayal. I mean, she's obviously a brilliant actress, but I thought that character was so well written and such an interesting conception for a character, and I was amazed that she made it through all 73 episodes.
Yeah, she also had her family died, right? So that's what's in one of the episodes for like everyone around her, all her loved ones. One day, the cops showed up and did an next of kin notification and told her, "I'm sorry, they got into an accident, they're all dead."
Yeah,
and
amazing.
That propelled her to work on the campaign for the mayor, which led her to politics, which led her to her position and her circumstances. Yeah, it's motivation.
Yeah, very, very dark stuff, but super interesting setup for a character.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. I think this series, both the original and the current. Let's not talk about the current series just yet. That may be coming. But the reimagined series from 2004 and 2009. I like how the later series took things from the original and they tweak it, right? And you see examples like not only just the genders of some of the characters, but even things like that. What's up with that sports game? Is it triad, pyramid? What it's called?
Pyramid.
Pyramid.
Yeah, okay. I think in the original they call it triad or something. I just saw that.
No, pyramid.
Pyramid, right? Mm-hmm. That's so 1970s. That's great. Because it makes absolutely zero sense how do you play the damn thing.
Oh yeah, here's a fun bit of trivia from the book. They had no rules for the game, so the first time they shot that in season 2, they just told the actors to play around with the ball and try to make it look real. They had zero rules when they started filming it. They were just making it up as they went along.
Wow.
Very cool.
Yeah. Okay, what's the difference between Vipers and Raptors? Is it just two different ships, or is it just same? Basically?
Isn't the Viper the little single fighter, and the Raptor was the helicopter version that you could fit several people?
Were there Vipers in the re-imaged one series?
The Vipers are from the original series. The Raptors, they never really in the original series they never really talked about how people got from one ship to another.
Yeah, well.
They just kind of happened. So it was nice to have that kind of that explains there would be smaller ships that would fly between the bigger ships in the fleet. That duh.
I must admit, I love how they shoot the Vipers taking off from the Raptors in this long, giant launch bay. and you have all the lights. Like visually, that does it for me. And when I see it, I think of Space Mountain from Disney World or Disneyland. Right?
That's cool.
And I actually looked this up. So Disney built the first Space Mountain at Disney World in Florida in 1975. And then they added one at Disneyland in about 78, 79. Right? So the original Battlestar Galactica may have taken this as inspiration to say, hey, that's a cool effect. Let's do that. Because on Space Mountain, what you do is on the lift of the roller coaster going up, you go through all these lights on the other side, right? And it's all like, wow, you're in the seat of a Viper or a Raptor. And that's what Space Mountain uses. But it's cool.
Yeah, I thought that was very cool. I liked the idea of essentially having a great big old aircraft carrier and an old ship that was about to be mothballed and a bunch of fighters on it. I thought that was a really cool way of looking at space travel and space battles. And I thought it was a neat departure from other episodic space-based series that we had. Now, I think we have to talk about that guy who, little-known actor. He was in, Blade Runner? And
who else?
I think he was. What else was he?
Blade Runner 2049.
Miami Vice. He was in. A few times. Edward James Olmos. I love him. He is so good.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
He really had the gravitas.
Agreed.
Yeah, I thought he just played that character so perfectly, and I thought he. Just every scene he was in, it's hard to say that he owned the screen because there were so many good actors in this series, but I found him incredibly compelling.
What do you make of his character and the character's relationship with President Rosalind?
I thought that was great. I like how there was this sort of little dance around each other. Like they start out, I'm in charge, no, I'm in charge, basically. Like one is the civilian authority, one is the military authority, in what is definitely a military situation. And she has no expertise, and his willingness to defer to her would be almost zero in that situation. And I love the way they played that tension. And then watching the two of them become closer and closer, sort of ideologically, and then finally as close friends, I thought that was really well played.
Was there any time they actually slept together?
Yes, they did.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I missed that episode. I haven't watched it in a couple of years. I should go back to it. So, yeah. So that's interesting. So they became lovers, and they really care. And I have to admit, the last episode of season 4, the finale of the series, is it's
heartbreaking.
Yeah, heartbreaking. When she dies and how they died. I really love the whole going back to the new Earth and looking at what is probably Neanderthals and saying what to do now, right? And just how they closed out a lot of the character arcs. That episode was amazing. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people on the internet hated that when it came out. I thought it was a great ending.
Yeah. I think I can understand. Okay, let's going to send our ships into the sun and see if we can evolve to break the cycle of violence.
Because
it wasn't
that's
so much
so
evolving as having sex with the Neanderthals, but
that's what I thought about.
Well, Neanderthals and Cylons,
yeah.
and Cylons, right? Not at the same time, but still. So.
Well, but again, like this that leads directly into my like, this is the colonists or the Golga Frenchians. Well, shit.
You're gonna have to mate with either a proto-human or 6. Make your choice.
Well, let's not be judgmental, okay? Okay.
and a lot of people really hated the ending where basically like there was a god and everything can be explained because God did it. But I thought that was a cool twist because there were certainly implications of some kind of higher power throughout the later seasons. And I remember there was a moment in season 4 when Baltar is on his little pirate radio and he's like looking at Head 6 and he tells them like there are angels out there. And I remember when that aired, I was like, oh, that's like a big hint to, where this is really going. So I thought it was a cool ending that Head 6 and Head Baltar were kind of like angels sent by God. And also the whole thing with the resurrected Starbuck as well. There was clearly something metaphysical going on there. So I thought that was a perfect ending to the show.
Yeah, but it wasn't preachy. They didn't say God, like he hates it when you call him that, right? It's just
it hates it when you call him.
Yeah, there's forces at play that you cannot explain through rationality. It's a mystery.
Yeah, I appreciate that they walk that line without getting too preachy about it.
George R.R. Martin hated the ending.
Oh yeah.
Oh really?
Yeah, I'm just reading a quote from him online, and it's him saying, I'll just read the quote. Battlestar Galactica ended with God did it. Looks like somebody skipped writing 101 when you learn that Deus Ex Machina is a crappy way to end a story. Yeah, sometimes the journey is its own reward. I certainly enjoyed much of the journey with BSG, but damn it, doesn't anybody know how to write an ending anymore? Writing 101, kids. Adam and Eve, God did it. It was all a dream. I've seen Clarion students left stunned and bleeding for turning in stories with those endings.
And if anybody knows a good ending, it's Game of Thrones.
Well, I mean, are we talking the series? Or are we talking?
I know. He didn't do the TV show, but they did go off of his outline of events. So, however he does the book, that is basically how it's going to end.
Although the funny thing is, he's never actually managed to achieve an ending, and here he is criticizing one.
Well, it's kind of this is a bit of a tangent because that's what we do here, but it's kind of like how Joss Whedon has gone off on occasion about how he doesn't like Empire Strikes Back because it ends on a cliffhanger and cliffhangers are bullshit. But then look at the end of Angel, like you bastard, you just did what you've been complaining about.
That's
sorry.
Oh, it's good.
Sorry, that the end of that show still makes me want to throw things.
How do we feel about Starbuck playing the piano and having daddy issues?
Well, I think everyone has daddy and mommy issues, but some more than others. So yeah.
You know what I would have found really cool is if they could have somehow gotten Dirk Benedict back to play her father.
Interesting.
That would have been interesting.
But there's also the aspect, if you look at the Cylon side, the whole robots and IA, right? The creation aspect of it. The son killing the father, right? You have humanity who created the Cylons, and then the Cylons are trying to kill humanity, and then things got interesting, and there's civil wars and different thoughts and different religious beliefs in either camp. And what happened with if you look at the original series, apparently it was the lizard people who created the Cylons. Or am I getting that right? The lizard people were involved somehow.
I don't think they ever actually explained where the Cylons came from in the original series. They just showed up.
Yeah, I've done a lot of reading on this stuff, and yeah, apparently in the scripts, or at least in the context of the outline, it was the lizard people. And in the original, there was supposed to be a lizard on one of the head Cylon guys, the guy with the black robe, and which was cut. I don't know the name. But speaking of which, if you go on YouTube, there's actually a really good documentary. It's about 45 minutes long on Battlestar Galactica, the original series. It was done in 2003, so it's 25 years after the fact, and they interview a lot of the different actors. And I just watched it this afternoon, and it's pretty funny.
Oh, cool.
You can actually
I think it would have been... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I thought it would have been great if it turned out that the Cylons had originally been created by Dr. Theophilus.
Oh,
I
would have enjoyed that. No end. That would have been the best.
Well, actually, I kept thinking that because in the original series you had the head Cylons that were kind of like the intermediaries between Baltar and the Centurions. By the way, I love that they brought back the old style Centurions for that last battle on the hub.
Oh, yeah.
That was great. But I just had this thought, well, Lucifer and those other head Cylons are probably running around out there somewhere. Maybe that was the progenitor of the human form Cylons or something like that. But I turned out.
Wait, I gotta ask a question here. I did not watch the original 70s series, so the Cylons in that one were not created by humans?
Not as far as I know.
So they don't explain where they came from, and one of them was called Lucifer?
Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah, don't try to do the timeline with the two series because it's just a complete mess. Okay.
Yeah, I never watched the first series. I saw a couple of scattered episodes of it, but and so I was vaguely familiar with some of the characters, but I was pretty much a blank slate when I went into the reboot.
Yeah.
Well, I did read that there was a character called Iblis who was supposed to be like a satanic supernatural figure. Is that right?
That's right, yeah. And if you watch the documentary I just said from 2003, right? To say Battlestar Galactica original 2003 on YouTube, it will pop up. Trust me on that. Watch it because they cut they show scenes of all these people, and I remember that. It's like a bad version of Star Trek actually in many ways, but just more religious or mythical oriented or supernatural overtones, you know.
Well, Jonathan Harris, who played Dr. Smith in the original Lost in Space, he voiced Lucifer for 9 episodes. And I forget who the other... and then Patrick McEnany was the voice of Count Iblis. And that was the intermediary Cylon for Baltar between the Cylons and Baltar.
My brain just blew through the back of my head as I looked online and learned that Baltar in the original series was Count Baltar, who was played by John Colicos, who also played the Klingon Core in both the original series and later Star Trek Deep Space Nine.
Yep.
Oh, you didn't know that?
I had no idea. That's like I say, my brain is now splattered all over the wall behind me. That's incredible.
Here's a bit of trivia for our younger generation. If you watch the 1990s X-Men cartoon, he was also the voice of Apocalypse on it.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Hey, here's one. Remember, there's also the... let me put it this way. What's up with having pets on these TV shows from the 1970s, right? Because the original Battlestar Galactica had this ape-like dog. Right?
Well, because Boxy lost his dog in the invasion, so someone made him a robot dog.
Yeah, exactly. It's a robot dog. I can see pictures online.
By the way, in the original series, Boxy's mom was played by Jane Seymour.
Oh, okay.
So,
Really?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
She only survived 3 episodes though.
Yeah, war's tough. Yeah, I was thinking 1970s. So we got Muffet, the Edie of the chimp, right? And it just looks bizarre. Yeah. And this is, remember, this is like 78, 79. That's around the same time as Doctor Who, with the Baker. Was it Tom Baker being the Doctor Who with K9, who as a kid I loved. So we can restart this trend. I think science fiction should have dogs involved. What do you guys think? Robotic dogs. Has to be robotic dogs.
It has to be robot dogs. So so Porthos is out.
Yeah.
I loved K9.
Just reading this sentence online is enough to tell me everything I need to know about the first series. Boxy loses his Daggett, Muffet, to the destruction on Caprica. I lost my Muffet Daggett, or my Daggett Muffet.
Oh, wow. That's just precious.
Now, they did say frack on the original show, right?
They did. But they spelled it F-A-C-K, apparently, whereas the new show, or the newer show, spelled it F-A-A-K. F-R-A-K.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pronounced the same. So, and they did it to get past the censors. And actually, in the original series, it's so wacky, American television in the late 1970s, because they were limited on how many violent acts they could do, how many punches, how many fight scenes, not by production, but by the government, by the censors.
Interesting.
Right, and so that's why they created this language, and frack is just one of the words they actually created for the series. You know, I think that's brilliant, and I love the fact that the Reimagined series pay homage to it by using it and by making nods towards these things. Like frack, that's amazing. That's fracking awesome right there.
Yeah.
So we should mention why the reason we're talking about this in the first place. Joel had the episode idea of talking about how the current pandemic is going to affect future fiction. And we basically said, well, when the Spanish flu hit in 1918, it doesn't really exist in literature and culture because it was so terrible nobody wanted to write about it or to deal with it. So I was saying, I don't really think there's going to be a lot of pandemic style stories. And that kind of got us to talking about, well, Battlestar Galactica was a reaction to 9/11 in most respects. So that's how we got to Galactica, because it is fundamentally to its core a show about 9/11 and Bush's America and the war on terror and everything that happened because of that.
And
I think we're living in an era where everybody wants to express their feelings about whatever's going on at any given moment. And one thing that's really driven me bonkers during this pandemic is being part of I'm on the research ethics board of our university, and so many studies coming through about, discipline X, and then the classic title is "In the Time of the Pandemic," or in the time of, so like philosophy in the time of COVID, microeconomics in the time of COVID. And like everyone and their brother is doing a study of something in the time of COVID. I can only imagine that the arts are going to reflect this in a similar way. Like everybody's got to be writing COVID haikus somewhere. It really seems to be, especially because it's not a crisis where we all have to be active, right? It's not like we're being attacked by invaders we can see. We just, stay indoors and you're doing your bit for the public. And so we're staying indoors, and there's people who have a creative impulse are overwhelmed by the thing that's forcing them to stay indoors. So I think we might see a lot of art spawned out of the pandemic, unlike some of the other historical horrible things that happened.
I think the biggest thing is going to be unemployment, right? If you can't pay your rent, if you can't buy food, if you have to live on government subsidies, if you're going to live, I think many people aren't going to survive this. Financially, they're going to be homeless and on the street. Add in the whole healthcare crisis in the States, especially. Little known fact I just stumbled upon. So if I want to go down to Florida as a trip, or my California, and I usually get travel insurance, medical travel insurance, it's not going to cover COVID-19 related treatments or illnesses. So if you get sick, and if they can pin it on COVID-19, their insurance company is not going to pay out. Now imagine being stuck on a ventilator for a couple of days or a week or two. That's hundreds of thousands of dollars. You're bankrupt, and there's no way to risk manage that except just to take the risk on. It's insane. So it's all the ramifications of the response to this coronavirus that I find, we live in an interesting age, and who knows how creative writers are going to treat it in terms of the arts.
That's interesting, because I think my insurance said that they're going to pay in full for any corona-related illnesses. And I live in America, where that's like
so I read that.
But is that corona-related illnesses if you stay where you are, or is that
that's not true.
related?
It's not travel-related.
Yeah, so. If it's travel-related, you're basically saying, I understand the risks, so I'm going to take it anyway. Is the insurance going to cover that?
Yeah.
Well, maybe not.
There was a CBC News article a couple of days ago, so that's my source. And the whole thing too is that what's happening with just human relationships? If you're stuck in an apartment by yourself for months on end, like me, or you're stuck with a partner, I suspect divorce rates are going to increase.
Well, I mean, they've already said that domestic violence. Well, they've already said domestic violence rates have gone up,
which is horrible. Yeah, it's. But to me, the scary part is that knowing that you might get evicted tomorrow because you can't pay rent.
Yep. And
then you add the politics in the States in terms of having a presidential election in November and everything that's happened in the election cycle. Wow, it's scary. It's really scary.
Yeah, I mean, I've been saying since January that we're all fucked, but
yeah, but maybe there's an argument to be made that the Black Death in Europe in the 1200s, right, may have led to the Enlightenment, or at least the Renaissance, right, which led to the Enlightenment. Big giant leaps in thought, but it's on the line. So,
What I really want to know is if the Star Trek cruise is going to happen next year.
Hey, there's still tickets available. Okay.
That to me is the real danger in all of this. I mean, obviously, I'm being glib and silly, and no disrespect to those who've had serious losses or who've lost loved ones or who are sick with this. I have nothing but empathy for those people. But I have been worrying about the logistics of different industries, including not just cruise ships, but the tall office towers, right? Like places that are basically petri dishes and cesspools. How do you go back to it? How do you find a new equilibrium or a new normal in these places? And I will admit rather selfishly, I have been thinking, do I get to go on the Star Trek cruise again next year? Will I have to buy a hotel room for 14 days before the Star Trek cruise so I can quarantine in America for 14 days before I get on the boat? I don't know how these things are going to work.
Well, I haven't seen any announcements for STLV this year, so who the heck knows at this point?
Yeah.
I also think it would take a few years for this to seep into fiction, because like if you look at BSG, the the miniseries came out in December. Was it 2003? Yeah, December 2003. So it was over 2 years after 9/11, and so it had been a little bit amount of spacing, but obviously nobody was doing a 9/11 style story immediately after 9/11. It was too raw and tragic still. Like it takes time to deal with these kinds of things in popular culture, even if it's just as metaphor.
I just think people will be so in need of employment that it's going to be a premium to get a job. And when they look around, they realize that some of the jobs are going to be taken over by robots or artificial intelligence because they can do the job. Then what? You're going to have millions of people who's going to be out of work. What can they do if they have to limit their movements and limit gatherings, right? Yeah, work from home in certain parts, but a lot of that type of stuff can be done through software and artificial intelligence. If you predict that 20 years down the road or 10 years down the road, that's the scary part.
Very scary.
There will be a lot of more personal shoppers and warehouse packaging workers. Amazon will be employing more people at shitty wages.
Yeah.
Jeff Bezos will be a trillionaire by 2029.
Mm-hmm.
Just across the T on Derek's point a little bit ago, Michael Bay has announced, did you guys see this? He's got a pandemic-themed thriller about the current pandemic.
Really?
Yeah, he's already producing it, and it's going to be called Songbird, and it's set 2 years in the future.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Michael Bay.
There'll be a lot of explosions, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. Randall, since I got you there, man. So in terms of academia, right, universities and colleges, do you see that there's going to be less faculty positions?
Well, we've frozen all hiring.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see what the new normal is going to look like, right? Because we've announced at our university that the entire fall term, all upper year courses are online. And they want them, the administration, not of the law school, but of the central university, wants them to be asynchronous, meaning we're not just meeting on Zoom and chatting with our students, giving a lecture like we would in person. They want us to record these things, produce them, put them online so that students in different time zones, students in different circumstances can watch them. Now, if we do, and they are giving us the intellectual property rights that we would otherwise hold in these lectures that we put online. So the university is not going to claim them and then just reissue them and say, you don't need to teach your class next year. We have an online version that teaches itself. We're going to give you another thing to teach so we don't have to hire as many people. People are worried about that sort of thing happening because as more and more courses go online, of course, once you've got the course up and running online, if it's not an area that moves quickly, like if you're teaching 17th century English literature, then maybe you don't need to update your course that often. And so you can record an online course. And once you've done 3 or 4 of those, then it really just comes down to grading exams. And maybe we need half as many professors because lecture hours are not a thing anymore. So there are worries about that. But we have, just at the law school level, we're not hiring anybody in the next year. The university has hired a bunch of specialist teachers who deal with online learning to help all the faculty members across all faculties put up online courses. But my own philosophy is that the best approach to the pandemic right now, for a person in my position, is to treat your courses like Band-Aid solutions. Like, we're in an emergency, deal with it like an emergency. Don't create Cadillac online content that is then going to give you the temptation to not deliver in-person content ever again. Because I do think, at least with the sort of courses that I teach, the in-person contact is actually important. Getting students to think on their feet and be able to argue with you in real time, rather than have them look at a screen and assume they could make an argument if they had to. So yeah, it's going to have impacts on every industry. Those are my rambling thoughts about how I think it'll work in mine.
Yeah, I think it will devalue the value of the education, not only in the classroom, which is going to be brought online, but also the entire experience of going to university or college, or going to grad school, or going to law school. Because when you do that in person, you have to interact with other human beings.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You mentioned before, well, it's one thing to be smart and intelligent; it's quite another thing to be competent. Right? I'm paraphrasing you badly, but Randal, yeah, it's.
We'll educate a generation of Gaius Baltars.
Great. Yeah.
Oh, dear God.
But I think art is going to reflect the society no matter what. I don't think there's going to be, let's make another Contagion movie. I don't think there's much appetite in that. I think it's going to be the consequences. The shake-up of our society, because we are going through a major shake-up. We're in a crisis, which is not going to end in the next year or two. So, dark stuff.
Almost as dark as Battlestar Galactica.
Speaking of which, so NBC has announced as of last fall, 2019, that they're working on a new Battlestar Galactica, probably in the same universe. That's going to be part of their new Peacock streaming service when it is introduced to the market later this year in 2020. What do you guys make of this?
And again, my question now is the same question I had when they rebooted it the first time. Is this going to be a reboot, or is this just going to be like a continuation of the story somehow?
Yeah.
Not that they can continue. Not that there's much happening on Earth 150,000 years ago, but maybe not all of the ships went flying into the sun.
I personally think it's too soon to be doing this, because the old one only finished 10 years ago. I mean, it's not that old, and it was done so well, and it was so great. And I just recently rewatched it, and it holds up well. I mean, it looks like a modern day show. The CGI is really good. The space fights look gorgeous. So it's not like it's an old antiquated concept from 20 or 30 years ago that needs to be completely redone. I mean, they just did it, and they did it pretty well. And it's particularly boggling to think that it's set in the same continuity as the 2004 series. I mean, I don't even understand what the hell that would mean, unless it's just like 100,000 years later, the next reiteration of that cycle or something. But yeah, I don't know. I'm wary about it, but who knows? It could be amazing.
You will be baffled by this, but you guys talking about this series coming out as a resurrection of Battlestar Galactica 5 minutes ago is the first I've heard of it.
Because run in and read the show notes. I know.
Yeah, I didn't realize that this. I glanced at the show notes, but I did not notice that. I did not realize that this was going to be redone. I agree that 10 years is a little soon. That being said, it was such a popular show, and it's one of those shows that's gotten more popular not while it's airing. I mean, I read that it was one of the most time-shifted shows in the history of all shows. Like, people recorded it and watched it later. People ended up buying it on DVD massively rather than watching it while it was airing. So there's an appetite to spend money on this thing. And if anything drives creativity, it's knowing that there's an appetite out there to spend money on the thing. So yeah, I'd be surprised if this doesn't go forward. What it'll look like, who knows? It could be a parallel story, like what happened on the Pegasus, the whole time that we saw Galactica running around out there. Was there another ship? Who
Or
knows?
maybe it's a story of anyone else who managed to get Alpha Caprica before dying horribly of radiation poisoning.
Yeah, or the other Earth before it got nuked.
Yeah.
Yeah, or maybe more focusing on the world of the Cylons from their perspective.
See, the problem with telling a contemporaneous story to the 2004 series is that it can never go anywhere or change anything, because all of the changes in Cylon society happened within the 2004 show, and all of the revelations about God have happened in the 2004 show. So if it's just going to be something that takes place in that same time period with a side cast of characters, they can never do anything important plot wise. They could only ever just be reacting to events that have already been portrayed, which is why I think it would have to be in a vastly different time period. You'd either have to be the cycle from 100,000 years before then, or the cycle 100,000 years after then.
Unless it's not universe-shaping events, right? Like, you can't have things that fundamentally change the plot of the universe, but you can become deeply interested in what happens to 15 refugees from Earth who are trying to survive on what was supposed to be a luxury space cruise. It doesn't have to be a story that's going to alter the universe or the timeline, in the same sense that we can watch an episode of Law and Order set in 2014 and like we know what happens in the world, and this is not going to happen, but what matters to us is the small movements of the soul between individual characters and what we see happening to them. And if they can create characters we care about, it doesn't matter so much what's going on in the background universe. So I think there's some scope, just like we see them situating lots of Star Trek shows and other things within the existing timeline. Like, let's put Discovery between a couple of different series. Let's put Enterprise in there, with more or less success. But what matters to me, just personally as a fan, when I watch these things, I don't so much care that I know what ultimately happens with the NX Enterprise. What matters to me is, what happens with Captain Archer? What happens with T'Pol? The characters come to matter to me. And even though I know the universe will tick along without them afterward, because I know what happens in the original series, The Next Generation, I don't know what happened to these folk. And maybe there's some scope for creativity and interesting plot lines there.
Well, I mean, similarly, they just announced, Strange New Worlds, and we know how that story is supposed to. We know how Pike's story is supposed to end, but there's 10 years of stuff they can play around with before that happens.
Absolutely.
Or they can just change the timeline, right? Yeah,
That's right.
Multiple universe. So, amazing, guys. But I think it's time to close our doors, to get on with our busy lives, and to reflect on what's important in our lives. Plus, I need another drink.
And we need to get our BB celebration on for Derek's birthday.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yay. So
I want to make two hearty recommendations, Galactica related. The first one is the aforementioned book, So Say We All, by Mark Altman and Edward Gross. You can buy it as an ebook, as a book. It's really good. If you're a fan of the show, it's absolutely fascinating and very entertaining. It covers both series, the original and the reimagining. By the way, did you know that when Edward James Olmos says, "So say we all," that was improv? He made that up on the spot. That was not in the script.
Nice.
And the other thing I would recommend, there is a podcast being done by Tricia Helfer and Mark Bernardin called Battlestar Galacticast. They are covering every single episode of the show and giving commentary and talking about it. They are almost done with season 3. The most recent episode was The Sun Also Rises, the episode before the 2-part season 3 finale. So you can go through and listen to that. It's a very entertaining series, and they regularly have many of the other cast members on as guest stars in each episode.
Nice.
I still have to get into the film business. Yeah. I'm playing the 649, the lottery, so it's just a matter of time, right? It's just math. Okay.
Nice.
I know. So let's see. Our closing. This show is released as a podcast and on YouTube. So hopefully, this will be released later today as a podcast, and will hit YouTube tomorrow. Check out our Discord server. It's a great source of news and commentary. You can find an invite for our Discord on our social media channels, which are Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. I do Twitter and Instagram, and my friend Derek does the Facebook. Derek, you're doing a great job, man.
Thank you.
Our email address is at management@scifipubcast.space. Let's see. Carrie, what's your Twitter address?
My Twitter handle is Kerry Blackfire42. That's KERI Blackfire42.
And what are some of the other podcasts that you host?
I also do the Cape Chronicles, which covers superhero movies. We started back with the 78 Superman, and 2 weeks ago we just released our 50th episode, which was on The Dark Knight, and now we're doing Punisher Warzone, which that's kind of anticlimactic. Oh, but anyway, and then I'm also on DC Talk, which is a news and review show about all things DC Universe, and we are recording our 100th episode tomorrow.
Oh, excellent! And
Yes, very nice.
And these shows are on the Random Chatter Network.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes,
So check them out. Support our friends and our little community. Derek, what's your Twitter address?
I am at Derek J. Beebe, and let me give you my PayPal account so everyone can send me birthday gifts.
Yeah,
Ha.
yeah, great. You working on anything like creative writing ways?
Well, I mean, I'm still waiting for something else to get published, but I am still plugging away. I have 12 novels written now, and at the moment I'm more working on editing the existing ones than writing new stuff, because it's very hard to write original content right now. It's kind of a, hard time to be creative.
I'm trying to be creative as much as possible. That's why I'm working on tiki drinks.
Very nice.
And Randall, man, what's your Twitter address?
It's at Randal_Graham.
Hey, it's funny. I love calling you man because you're a former professor of mine. Okay.
You probably called me that while you were my student.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Let's see. So you're the author of Before Life, published by ECW Press, and you have a new book coming out sometime in September, if I recall.
Yeah, Afterlife Crisis, the sequel to Before Life, comes out on September 8th, 2020. It'll probably be available in stores a few days before that, actually. And currently working on book 3, yet to be named because the publisher hates the name that I came up with. So we shall see. But hey, what the hell? They're publishing it, so I'm happy. I'll do what they tell me. Yeah. But and they're really good at leaving me alone with content. It's just my title. I'll let you guys in on the title later on. But working hard and trying my best to keep ahead of the stuff. But very excited. I got the final page proofs for Afterlife Crisis about 5 days ago, and I have until June 1st to turn them around and get them back in. And I like the way it's looking, but then again, not everybody likes everything the same. So maybe you'll hate the book, maybe you'll like it, but it's coming out anyway.
Nice.
In September.
Is it available for pre-order right now?
It is available for pre-order on Amazon, at ECW Press, at Barnes & Noble, I think. And it got a really nice review in Publishers Weekly a few days ago. They came out and said some nice stuff about it. So that was nice. That should help get the word out a little bit.
Yeah, it's my understanding of the publishing business that pre-orders are critical to get books on things like the New York Times bestsellers list. So
yeah, absolutely. To sell a certain number of copies in a short amount of time, the pre-orders are quite helpful. So buy early and buy often.
There you go. Great. And I'm Joel. My Twitter address is at Joel_Welch. Guys, any other closing thoughts before we close the doors?
Post your tiki cocktail recipes.
Yes.
There you go.
And then we can have our next podcast can be a tiki party.
Yeah, great.
And we can look at how tiki themes have arisen in have appeared in various sci-fi venues. For example, Risa on Star Trek.
Interesting. Okay, cool.
Yes. Okay.
That's a book topic waiting to be written right there. Okay, good.
That's right.
Okay, guys, closing time. Please take care and make it home safe. We'll see you next time. Bye now.
So say we all.
Bye.
So
Bye,
say
everybody.
we
Happy
all.
birthday.
Bye.
Cheers.
Music provided courtesy of Logan Rathbone. Podcast logo by Jea Rhea. Copyrighted Joe Welch. Listen responsibly, and we can't wait for your next visit to our fine establishment. Cheers.